Hi, welcome back after the coffee break. And we are going to have Dr. Damian Celio. He used to work as a postdoc with Professor Simmons for the calculus project, and he's now a researcher in reality, and he's going to give us a talk about zero grounding. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. So yeah, basically I'm going to talk about how to visually ground language understanding and strategy for that. I will develop ways in which using visual data during training can help language understanding. So to do that, I will introduce mass language modeling, some brief definitions, and based on that, I will explore the ways in which multimodal data can improve unimodal understanding by exploring or quantifying the different sources where the grounding can come from. I will make some experiments and show some experiments and conclude. So we want models to understand language, but we train them mostly on text, and it's kind of, as illustrated in the meaning-informed paper by Emily Bender, a situation where we have two people that want to communicate. So people communicate with language, and it can be text, which can be analogous to token. And models learn only based on tokens when they are unimodal. And we expect them to catch understanding, but it's doubtful whether the extent to which they are able to map things to the real world without having ever been exposed to the real world. They can do a lot of things, and well, it's kind of an open question, the extent to which they can do things. And it's also related to the Chinese room argument, but it's harder to make the Chinese room arguments when you are talking about a model that was exposed to visual training data, because the arguments sounds weird. So mass language modeling, you take some text, you mask it, you predict what you masked. It can be causal, where it's only the end, or mass language modeling, where it's random deletions. And with visual linguistic model, we have, sometimes, in many cases, a language model, L, and a visual model, V, and a visual linguistic model, VL. And we use these kind of models mostly for tasks that involve both modalities, such as visual question answering. To do that, you have to have a joint understanding of both modalities. So if you want to have an image and ask where is the cat sitting. But to train these kind of visual linguistic models, we do an analogous of masked language modeling, but we mask both modalities and we can mask the text. And then the model can learn to use the paired image to predict. And it's very helpful because without that, the model is very much incentivized to use that signal, because it basically contains the answer. But you can also mask some parts of the image and use the text to predict the masked part of the image or some aspects of it. But the question I'm asking is, how can visual linguistic pre-training can help language-only understanding? And when you have language-only understanding task, you don't have the image. But you can still benefit from having learned from visual linguistic data. And I will kind of explore the different ways, the different paths through which this can occur. So one of them is from transfer knowledge, because when you learn to predict the image, even when you don't have the image anymore, you have learned to develop expectations of the image. And so if you have a model that is trained, it can predict the image even though it's not there. And by using the data or the representations that are developed during the expectation, the model can have a better language understanding because it can reason on what it is expecting. And that is a way that is relatively intuitive to see how visual linguistic training can contribute to language-only understanding. Another way, and you can basically isolate that part of learning to predict the visual part from the text. From the pretending objective, you can disentangle that part. Another way is from using the image-to-text prediction, because when you are exposed to visual stimuli, it can have a kind of steering effect, so that even when the image is not there anymore at test time, you can also benefit from having a model that was learned with that objective. Because it has a kind of regularizing effect, potentially, and that's why I illustrate it with steering wheels. You can learn a bike by using steering wheels, and then when the steering wheels are not there anymore, you are normally able to do better, or to still ride a bike. And these are kind of two directions from the sorry, it's a bit loud. From the multimodal masked language modeling, and we can disentangle both, and I will evaluate both. Another way is, since we don't have image anymore at test time for language-only tasks, is to use retrieval to find images that are related. And we can do that also many times, because if you retrieve images from a database of images, it's quite likely that the text that you have will not have an exact correspondence with your situation, the situation with which you are working. And so you can retrieve as many as you want images, and they don't match the reality, but since you have many, you can capture many aspects of the situation that you are encountering, and maybe the model can learn to leverage that to work, and it's kind of recalling memories that you encountered in the past and composing them to face a new situation. And you can do that at the scene level, so by finding related scenes. But when you do that, you face the problem of compositionality, because there are many possible things, and it will be very hard to find exactly what you want, as I said before. And to alleviate that problem, we can also work on the object level, so identify objects on the text, like nouns, and do retrieval on nouns. And by doing that, we decompose the situation even more, and the model can then use the pieces of visual information to solve the task if it's helpful. So I kind of developed a typology of the grounding signals, and some of them were explored previously, not that much the text to image, the image to text, which is a bit less intuitive. And what I also omitted at the time, well, I put it in the typology, but was a synthesis-based model. So instead of retrieving an image, you can just generate an image by using a model like DALL-E now, or DALL-E 3. And at the time, it didn't work very well. It was quite bad. But now it's more realistic, and by doing that, you kind of use a modularity of systems, because you have an expert system at visualizing things, and you can have a model that can then use that. And it will be interesting to see the extent to which it helps language understanding to directly use this kind of synthesized image. And as an evaluation for these different sources of groundings, I use language modeling perplexity on the COCO dataset, where we have images paired with captions. And it's very concrete domain because it's very visual. And I also do perplexity evaluation, and we also have the image associated canonically, so it can be used to see what happens when you give the real image as a kind of comparison baseline. And I also do language modeling on more abstract domain like Wikipedia and Book Corpus, where things are less concrete and it gives another point of view, another evaluation. And I also evaluate on some more concrete tasks like natural language inference on SIG, which is based on captions, so it's by design kind of concrete, and RTE, which is also general domain, or more general because it interleaves many shared tasks on news and different corpuses. And also common sense inference, so I use discourse relation and plausibility and metaphor detection. And I choose these tasks because they have kind of a visual component to them to some extent. And PDTB's discourse relation is more abstract. So on language modeling, what I did is that I use a multilingual visual linguistic architecture like LXMERT. And I evaluate the COCO perplexity with a real image by doing here the multimodal pre-training. And I also evaluate the results with retrieval. And it's interesting to notice that even with one image, you can still gain from the retrieval. But when you add many images, so the images that you find are not exact, you notice that you also almost retrieve the original perplexity of the image. So that's quite interesting. And when you only use one object, it's worse because obviously it's kind of misleading. You focus on one object. But when you have many objects, you also get some improvements. And I did the same thing with Wikipedia. And obviously, it's harder to gain things from grounding because it's more abstract. But still, you get some moderate improvements when you use many images. And here, it's really key to use many images. I also run the evaluation on downstream tasks, so I average the downstream tasks because I don't have the time to describe the results more precisely. In my backbone architecture, I use Albert Bayes. And here it's the multimodal architecture with language only training, and I got an unfortunate drop of performance because by using the multimodal architecture, that is less, it was initialized randomly for the visual part, visual linguistic part, you get a drop of performance. And here it's when using both, so no image at a test time. And I noticed that using the text-to-image grounding and the image-to-text grounding works when both are there, but when only one is there, you don't get better results. So it's really important to have the grounding signal from both directions by learning to predict the image from the text and the text from the image. And you also get some improvements by using objects-based retrieval. So my takeaway is that image retrieval, well, is helpful for can be helpful for language modeling and some downstream tasks with a multimodal architecture. But it's not that clear, and I think that the idea of using grounding visual grounding, it's been happening for a while, but it's still not clear the extent to which it improves downstream tasks, because in the same way we have what we call the multilinguality curse. When we have many languages, we could expect that we gain from multilinguality, but it kind of decreases the accuracy because it takes some part of the capacity. It's kind of the same with multimodality. And so even though you introduce some additional training signal, you kind of take it for the capacity. But the grounding space is vast, like there are many ways to do it. And it was also shown that with scale, the curse problem might diminish. So that's kind of my conclusion. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien, very much for the interesting presentation. Do we have some questions?
Hi, yeah, super interesting. I'm looking forward to chatting more. One question here, so for the masked language modeling, are you masking one token or are you masking more than a token sometimes?
It's more like in the standard way, it's many at the same time because it's basically more efficient, because you get many subtasks if you have many masked tokens, and so that's I think one of the main reasons. But yeah.
The reason why I'm asking is this, the takeaway here that the retrieval helps language modeling and not downstream tasks. So I'm wondering if you were to mask meaningful units, whether that would be like actions, for example, whether that would be better for downstream tasks. So I'm relating this to, for example, this model that we use, Merlot Reserve, which learns the masked language modeling objective. And it's shown to actually perform really well on TV QA datasets. So the question answering datasets. So downstream performance, not just language modeling. So I'm wondering if like the masking is the thing that's different between that kind of model and the kind of models that you have.
This was the masking for the previously, like this kind of models, they used object detectors to detect the regions, and then we use a vision encoder to form tokens there, and we use some positional encoding based on bounding boxes of the regions. And so it was kind of like for the visual part, by design, it's kind of semantic. But it's also a good remark, like the fact that we less and less, like we do some random masking. It's weird that we do it still so much, because we mask like words like the or that or commas, or like in a very random way that is not very interesting. Like it incentivizes the model toward learning superficial cues, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'm looking forward to chatting more about this. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions?
So the downstream tasks, I'm not sure how you do it now, but if you then do them by language modeling, and like the big GPT models now, right, they do their specific downstream tasks just by predicting next tokens all the way, do you think then it would help? Or, because I'm assuming now you solve the downstream task because you fine-tune it.
Yeah, it's fine-tuning, yes.
Right, so if it helps language modeling, but not the downstream task, but if the downstream task is still language modeling in some way?
Yeah, it's a good remark, because it might be that by using language modeling, you get more robustness. You might forget things during the fine-tuning, and so I don't have data to analyze your, but it's a very good remark anyway.
Some more questions? Okay, I just got an open question. I'm always interested in language grounding, and do you think that there is possibility that you can merge the language grounding with agent-based large language models in, totally virtual environments, so that you may ground the semantic and knowledge to the, concepts that is learned or bounded in the virtual environments?
For what kind of task would you do that?
I'm not sure, but like, we can use large language models as a driving module for agents and allow them to be interactive, to interacting with the virtual environment. So that, do you think that is possible for language grounding to like ground the knowledge to the interaction with the virtual environments? Okay, maybe we can discuss later. If we do not have like additional questions for Dr. Damian, we will have the next presentation by Nathan. Oh.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just one high-level question. So you talked a lot about grounding, which to me is super interesting. And to me, the way I define it for myself is information that is present in one modality that's helping enhance the conceptual representation from the other modality. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think there are multiple definitions of that. Like there is a visual grounding task. I think that is like finding the referring visual elements or something like that, and visually grounded language understanding. It's more like having understanding that is visually grounded, even though there is no underlying image because of the effect of grounding. So,
So
yeah,
right, so information that's, let's say you just have the language and there's no information in the language that is about this, and the vision is giving you new information. So it's information that's available in the visual modality that's not available in the language modality.
That's like obviously having visually grounded language understanding, it makes you better to use visual to merge visual signals. But what I was interested in was just text, and the case when you don't have an image, but still the visual structure of the world is kind of helpful for, or potentially helpful for dealing with text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, good. I wanted to ask about something else actually, which is beyond grounding. So I'm curious about when you have both language and vision, you could also get grounding, but you could get also composition between the language and vision, which is information to me. I define it as information that is new when you have both modalities. So for example, if you see a picture of an apple or a line drawing of an apple, and you hear the word red, you might infer that this apple is sweet, even though that's not really mentioned in either the image or the audio. So to me, that's composition, because it's new information that's not available in either modality. And so is that something that, do you think of composition as different from grounding, or do you think at all about it in your work?
Yeah, I think it's a different problem. I'm not sure about the exact meaning of grounding in all possible senses, because the one I use is kind of specific, and it might not be it might be misleading to merge it with the other senses, and Yeah, my answer would be kind of the same. That it's because you have a visually grounded understanding that you are able to better compose the modalities.
Okay, we can talk about it offline,
Okay.
maybe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we are going to have Nathan for our next presentation. And Nathan is currently a PhD student with Professor Dr. Mark-Francis Moons, and he's working on causal representation.
Should be working, right? Yeah.
Right, I use these to go back and forth. Cool. Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, so I'll be talking about causality and representation learning, and specifically as a tool for dealing better with distribution shifts. That's like the end goal I'm really interested in. I'll give a bit of a general intro of some of the concepts that are useful for the things I will talk about, and then there's really like two sort of parts, two approaches, let's say 2 attempts that I took at this. So first, I'll be, the framework I'll kind of be using is that of structural causal models. I think the framework that you're probably familiar with talking about causality is Bayesian networks, which in a graphical way sort of show, well, which variable causes which, and you can deduce all kinds of conditional dependencies from that. And structural causal models are really much the same. The point is kind of that the stochasticity is sort of pushed to the outside, so you assume there are these deterministic mechanisms, like with the same input, they will always give exactly the same output, and the reason that it's a little bit stochastic is because there are these external noise variables, which are also